So on CNN, they had a debate here about Trump's race attacks on Kamala. As you all know, because we discussed it already, he basically said, look, she would describe herself as Indian. She would describe herself as Indian. And then at some point she chose to be black. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to say, hey, you lean more in one direction of your identity or the other direction of your identity based on what's convenient in the moment, right? So you really identify more as being Indian than you did black when that was the thing that would help you, and now you lean more black whenever you're in rooms with other black people. And so it basically it's trying to make the argument she's phony, right? I mean, look, there's a couple problems with that. First of all, she's biracial, right? So like she is Indian and she is black. And so if she wants to lean into her mother's lineage at one point and her father's at another point, both things are true. So that's not a big gotcha. And then of course, by the way, he's levying this argument. People dug into his past. Apparently his dad pretended he was from Sweden to get an advantage when they were from Germany. And his family had a track record of doing that. And it's like, so that's technically the same thing, except in Trump's case, it's a little worse because they actually weren't Swedish. They were just German, but they pretended to be Swedish at times. But anyway, none of this fucking matters. Why are we talking about this? Why are we talking? I mean, it's quite a line of attack, right? She's actually not black. What? So on CNN, they're going to have this conversation about it. And honestly, it gets quite spicy. It gets a little spicy. It gets a little heated. Somebody tries to do the Trump whisperer game. Like, well, I think what he meant was what he's referring to is, and it's like, okay, let's see how this goes.
Ridiculous. And not only is it ridiculous, but, he seems to not understand the concept of being biracial. And frankly, it is the largest growing group among young people in this country. America understands what it means to be biracial. The fact that Donald Trump doesn't seem to understand this makes him look incredibly out of touch, not only offensive and not only racially insensitive.
Ryan?
So I don't think this is necessarily a good thing. But what I will say is that for a lot of Americans, particularly a lot of Black Americans, there is some sense of discomfort about the fact that when you look at high-profile, high-status, successful Black Americans, many of them are themselves multiracial, first or second generation Americans, immigrants or kids of immigrants, or they're themselves intermarried. There are some folks, there's a group called the American Descendants of Slaves, ADOS, a kind of emerging movement that you see in some spaces where people say, hey, wait a second, you have folks who are not part of this multi-generational, long Black American story who are claiming this mantle.
Oh, is that what Trump was thinking when he levied that attack? Let me channel the ADOS movement, the African Descendants of Slaves movement. Is that what he was doing? Hey, you're from the islands. You're not actually black. But remember, guys, it's literally the racists and the right-wingers were the ones who said, one drop rule. That's what we abide by. If you have one drop of black blood, you're black. Now, all of a sudden, it's, well, Trump was really, it was an intellectual point based on the ADOS movement of the African Descendants of Slaves, and they think she's a phony because she's mixed. And God, okay, look at the polls, Dippy. Look at the polls. This attack is backfiring massively on Trump. Biden was struggling with black voters. Kamala shot straight up. So this is all made up. Trump is just channeling the genuine fear and outrage of the ADOS community. Like, what the fuck are you talking? He knows that's not true. He's trying to intellectualize a dumbass Trump point. Trump is an old, out-of-touch white dude obsessed with race. He thought this attack would land. By the way, the reporting is his staffers were like, don't do it. Don't do it. It's not going to work. And then he did it.
That's necessarily a good thing, Lulu.
I'm just shocked that this is an argument that you are putting forward.
This is something I'm talking about as an analyst to describe the fact that the Black community is not a monolith. There are a lot of complicated, conflicted feelings. More than twice as many Black Americans oppose intermarriage as white Americans.
If your skin color is black, you're black. It is a completely ridiculous argument to be made in a country where you had the one drop, where you had the one drop rule, where you were.
She's making the point I made. She's good.
Actually penalized legally in this country if you had a single drop of black blood, to now say that this woman who is clearly black is somehow suspicious and is wearing a mantle and trying to assume some kind of ridiculous identity.
I'm describing public opinion. I'm describing the fact that this current does exist. And I think that when we're trying to understand the electorate,
let Ryan talk.
I think it's important to understand that this is one of those cleavages. I do not think that it was a good thing for Donald Trump to use this line of attack. I agree with Kara. Stick to policy.
This is not what Donald Trump. This is not what Donald Trump was doing. You are trying to explain something. If you asked Donald Trump, if you asked Donald Trump, what were you up to, Mr. Trump? He's not going to be like, you know, that there's this current in the African American community that talks about the descendants of slavery. Do you think that is what he?
She's right. This is the exact point I made. This is 100% right.
He was going there in order to do what he always does, which is to throw as much as he can against the wall and to see what
I'm
sticks.
afraid part of what I'm trying to do is actually try to give some insight into the fact that public opinion is changing, it's divided, and there is a big conversation about this. I don't think that this is the best.
There is not a big conversation about this. By the way, these are the same people who say the left is obsessed with identity and the left is obsessed with race and gender. The left didn't say dick about any of that shit. The left didn't say anything about any of that. You guys came out like, oh, how about her gender and how about her race and how about all these other identity characteristics and how about the African descendants of slaves? And you guys are the ones who are obsessed with identity politics. You guys are. You won't shut the fuck up about it. And that's a performative contradiction. Oh, you guys know the left. They're all obsessed with race and gender and identity stuff, bro. And I'm going to now proceed to talk about race and sex and gender nonstop for fucking days now. Like, God, they're so pathetic.
Pursue, but I do think that when you're talking about the black community, he's not looking to win 90% of the black vote. He's looking at what are interesting cleavages and divides within that population, and this is one of them.
That is desperately trying to put an intellectual veneer on the idiocy of an old bigot. Let's call it what it is. That's what it is. The idea that would work, because, and this is everybody who I talked to had the same reaction about this. Not just people who lean left. Everybody was like, what's the point? Like, what actually is your point? Like, let's just grant him everything he says, right? Grant him everything he says. Oh, she leaned more into the Indian side, and then when it was more convenient, leaned more into the black side or whatever. Let's grant him that. And who cares? Who cares? Let's keep it real. Obviously, if you are, a white man from a background of a decent wealth or income, right? That's a big advantage in this country. If I walk around in a suit and tie, people will treat me a very particular way because you don't know, I might be a fucking CEO or some shit, right? It looks like I'm powerful in that scenario. So therefore, if you have somebody from sort of like a niche background, a biracial background, black and Indian or Jamaican and Indian, right? Well, it's only the most reasonable thing in the world to, in some circumstances where it's more appropriate, talk about the fact, yeah, I have an Indian mother, right? And in other circumstances where it's more appropriate, yeah, my dad's Jamaican, my dad's black. The idea that that's scandalous, like, I don't understand how that's the case. Basically, what she's doing is what's called code switching. Code switching is like a basic societal decorum, bare minimum intelligence thing, right? Everybody code switches. Now, sometimes it doesn't happen to be around race or things like that, but, it could be like, do I act the exact same way in front of my mom as I do in front of Corin? No. Do I act the same way in front of my friends' parents as I do in front of my friends? No. And nobody looked at that like it's nefarious. It's just like, hey, in this environment, it's sort of more appropriate to do X, Y, and Z. And in this environment, it's more appropriate to do A, B, and C. And everybody's like, yeah, that's called being a human and using logical judgment on a case-by-case basis. But he's trying to make it scandalous that she's biracial, and she's expressed that she's biracial, and there's pictures of her in Indian garb, and there's pictures of her surrounded by black people in dressing a certain way, acting a certain way, whatever. Like, there's no meat there, and everybody knows it. And that's why the reaction was universally, mocking him. And that's why he desperately needs the right-wing intelligentsia to come out there and try to put a fake veneer of seriousness. Oh, yes, the ADOS movement, the African descendants of slaves. Look, that's always been silly to me because, again, if you're a black American living in this country, and you don't have an African descendant, you're from the Caribbean or you're from Fiji or whatever. But if your skin is black, you are probably living a black experience here in this country. And so the same, whatever sort of economic and sociological and political issues you deal with, it's going to be the same as somebody who is an African descendant of a slave, right? So the idea that you can sort of create a wedge there and try to exploit that, I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. If anything, it's made Kamala's numbers go up because it's like, here's the thing. She baits these Republicans into massively overreaching. This is what happened with Obama. Now, Trump better thank his lucky stars that he didn't have to run against Obama because Obama would have won. Because his whole thing was leaning into birtherism, leaning into he's not really American, right? And that's a massive overreach. It's a bigoted attack. And people in this country don't want to feel like they're racist, right? Even if some people are, most people who even are racist don't want to feel like they're racist. And to listen to that and agree with it, it's like you're sort of, you've given up the game, right? You're the one talking about race. You're the one talking about gender. You're the one talking about this identity shit. You're the one that's obsessed with it. Gee, why? Why are you so obsessed with it? Why did you lean into Obama's not American? Why did they bring back birtherism for Kamala? Why are you focusing on, her race and her identity? It's very desperate. It smells of desperation. It smells of an overreach, and everybody knows it. And even his more intellectual backers cannot put this serious veneer over it. They cannot put the lipstick on the pig, and that's clear. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.